and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. February 24th marks year 2 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, the conflict has been ongoing for several years when Russian forces annexed Crimea in 2014. Now, today on the show, we're going to be exploring the Ukraine conflict and in hopes of getting a better understanding of its complexities and nuances. To help me do that, I have joining me in the studio Olexiy Haran, Professor of Comparative Politics at the National University of Kiev Muller Academy. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Professor Haran.
Selamat petang.
Selamat petang to you. He's clearly got a grasp of the local language. Professor Haran, can we begin our conversation today hoping to understand the drivers of the Ukraine conflict? How should we understand how it all began? Okay. And how it's evolved?
Okay, so first of all, the basic for the background of the Russian aggression is the following. It's desire to restore the Russian Empire. So unfortunately, Ukraine, which is a very old country, the country rich with history, traditions, actually Kiev was founded, our capital Kiev was founded 600 years before Moscow.
Wow.
Okay, so it's the country with very, very long history, but we know that history is a complicated thing. So at some point, Ukraine became part of the Russian Empire, and in the Russian Empire, we Ukrainians were considered as, well, actually our language was banned from the public use, okay? They said that there's no Ukrainian language. They called Ukraine as Little Russia. So Ukrainian language was depicted as just as a dialect of the Russian language, and we Ukrainians, guess how we were called? If Ukraine was called Little Russia, how Ukrainians were called?
Russians?
Little Russians.
Little Russians.
Exactly. So this was the official term in the Russian Empire, okay? So now Ukraine became independent since 1991, but you know, Russia has this imperial ideology, and especially when Mr. Putin came to power, he started to repeat all these things, that Ukraine do not exist as a separate nation, that Ukrainians and Russians are the same people, and you may easily check it on Google, just Putin, Ukrainians and Russians, same people. So he was telling it for decades. So it created this background for the aggression. So the real reason is the former colonial empire try again to colonize us and denies our right not only for existence as a country, but us as a nation to exist. And I believe you in Malaysia, you can easily understand this.
How do Ukrainians feel about Russia now? I mean, there's so much intermingling, so much shared history and mixed heritage. I understand many Ukrainians have Russian heritage as well. So how do Ukrainians feel about it?
First of all, let me give you a personal story, because that would be easier to understand. So yes, I am half Ukrainian and half Russian. Okay, so I came from the family of Russified Ukrainians, because as I have said, Ukrainians were under at least more than 3 centuries of Russification. Okay, so basically my mother language is Russian language, but it didn't prevent me from becoming Ukrainian patriot. So we have this idea of Ukrainian political nation, which means that, well, majority of Ukraine are Ukrainians, 3/4.
Okay.
But there are also Russian, Crimean Tatars who are Muslim, there are Jews, there are Poles, Hungarians, and we have an understanding of political nation, which means actually it doesn't matter who you are. You can belong to any ethnic group, you can speak whatever language you would like, you may believe in this God or that God, but if you consider Ukraine as your motherland and you are ready, and you love it and you defend it, you are part of this nation. So, and that's why Putin miscalculated, because he thought that if some people are still speaking Russian language, they would greet Russian soldiers with flowers. And they met Russian soldiers with bullets and guns. Okay? So actually, Ukrainians appeared to be more united than ever.
Even after 1 year of this prolonged conflict that no one thought would last a year, what has the past year been like for Ukrainians?
Definitely, it was very, very tough year. Look, for you to understand, every third of Ukrainian had to leave the home. Every third, 1 to 3 leaves the home. 1 to 3 leaves the home. So we have a population before the war of about 36 million. So now it's even more than 12 million. So around 13 million who left their homes. Half of them are refugees to Europe, mostly women and children, because men are fighting, okay? And half of about 6 million are IDPs, internal displaced persons, yes. So definitely the situation is very, very difficult, and there's a lot of bloodshed and killings. And what Putin is doing, he's losing on the ground. So militarily, he appeared not to be able to conquer Ukraine. So because his idea was to seize Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, during just several days, and he failed.
Right. May I ask a personal question?
Yes, sure.
How has it impacted you personally, your family?
Yeah, so look, my family all stayed here. I mean, here in Kiev, in Ukraine. Definitely it was tough because Kiev was bombarded. And I will tell you just the history of my youngest daughter. So she was bombarded in Kiev, so she decided to move to our relatives in another part of the country, and then she was bombarded there. So she moved to western border of Ukraine, Polish-Ukrainian border, the city of Lviv, and Russians were bombarding Lviv as well. So actually she suffered from psychological stresses. Now she is back, but again, it's not easy, it's tough, but again, it's better than how people live on the occupied territories, because there are mass killings, torturings, deportations of Ukrainians, including deportations of Ukrainian children. And I would like also to mention that it's very difficult also for Ukrainian Muslims, because the natives of Crimea, they are Crimean Tatars and they are Muslim. They are the native of Crimeans, okay? How you say it, Bumiputra, right? So, and they suffered a lot during the Russian Empire because there were deportations at that time. Also in the Soviet Union, the whole nation was deported to the Central Asia and Siberia, the whole nation. And they were able to come back only on the eve of Ukrainian independence. So now they are occupied again, and they have the body, which is called Medjlis. So Medjlis is declared in Russia to be an extremist organization, though this movement traditionally is non-violent. And for many Crimean Tatars, it's impossible to go to their families to Crimea. I have students from Crimea, from Crimean Tatars, who are in Kiev, in Lviv, in other cities, and they cannot go to see their parents. And many Crimean Tatars are imprisoned and are in Russian prisons. So actually, I would like to share this information in Muslim countries, because I think it would be only logical that Muslim countries, would raise the voice of solidarity with their Muslim brothers. So there are huge repressions against them, and Malaysia is a member of Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Right.
If I may, because
Sure.
you asked me about the background of the conflict.
Yes.
So again, to explain. So first of all, as I said, number one is that former colonial empire is trying to get us back. Okay. Number two, after the split of the Soviet Union, Ukraine inherited from the Soviet Union huge nuclear arsenal of missiles. And our nuclear arsenal was the third largest in the world. British, French, and Chinese combined together. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Okay, so we became nuclear power with the third largest nuclear arsenal. So, but Ukraine decided to give up its nuclear weapons. And in 1994, it was signed. It's called the Budapest Memorandum because it was signed in Budapest. Again, it's very easy to Google. It's just one page. So everybody can easily check what is written there. So Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons, and great powers, United Kingdom, the US, and guess what is the third power, great power? Guess. Russia.
Okay.
They
Supported.
guaranteed our territorial integrity. Okay? They guaranteed that they will not violate the borders of Ukraine. And in 2014, Ukraine officially had non-bloc status, like Malaysia. And we denuclearized. And Ukrainians didn't want to be in NATO. Not at all. We wanted to be non-bloc and neutral. And in 2014, Russia, in violation of every treaty it signed, attacked Ukraine and occupied Crimea. So this was incredible violation of all international rules, but the unique case is that Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons and received these guarantees of territorial integrity, and it was violated.
Okay, can we talk about the role of these external actors then?
Yes.
NATO in particular. Putin bears the primary responsibility of this military offensive against Ukraine. But does NATO have any kind of shared responsibility after the past quarter century of expansion? Do they deserve any kind of shared responsibility in this conflict?
Look, I will. If we are talking about Ukraine, the answer is no. This is full Russian responsibility. But let me, yes, expansion of NATO, this is true fact. So the question is, why do you think such countries of Poland, small Baltic countries, Romania, Hungary, they wanted to become NATO members? Why?
Security?
Security. They were part of communist empire or Soviet Union empire. So they knew what communism is, and they knew what Russian Empire was. So they wanted to be secure. That's why they joined NATO. Regarding Ukrainians, we were not realists. We were very naive people. Because as I have said, we believed that it's possible to be non-bloc, non-neutral. And Ukrainians didn't want to be a member of NATO. So, the basic reason, the bottom line, there was no threat from NATO, from the territory of Ukraine, because Ukraine wasn't part of NATO and didn't want to become it. And there were no NATO bases, military, soldiers, missiles, even until 2022. So, and Putin attacked.
When we look at the conflict, we've talked a bit about the Russian motivation for the military offensive. We understand NATO's motivations. What about the other stakeholders? When you think about Europe's motivations, when you think about the US's motivations, does it make sense to you?
Well, let's start with Russian narrative, and some Russian narratives are still popular in the global South, I would say,
Okay.
because of Western colonialism and sometimes anti-Western approach, anti-American approach, and so on and so forth. If we are talking about Ukraine, again, as I have said, the West also didn't want to expand NATO. Why? Because they didn't want to confront with Russia. They were very cautious. So even now, even after the start of the invasion, we asked for NATO, close our skies. We are fighting alone. We understand that nobody will come to fight for us because we are not NATO member, okay? So, but close the skies. And NATO said no. Why? They didn't want confrontation with Russia. But then, with Russian atrocities, finally, this mood changed, and they started to supply us with weapons. But it's belated. It's belated. But this is a support, and for which we are thankful. But again, you know, for example, now we are asking for fighters, for jets, and it's not clear. So the official response is no. Why? Because we need to defend our civilians. So again, it's not about definitely. You may criticize, for example, the United States for Iraq, okay? But okay, let's be objective. So criticize Russia for what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And by the way, here I would like to express my thanks to Malaysian government, because in the United Nations there were several resolutions in favor of territorial integrity of Ukraine, and 143 countries supported territorial integrity of Ukraine, Malaysia included. Do you know how many countries supported Russian position?
No.
4. I can name them: North Korea, Belarus, Nicaragua, and Syria.
Is it enough?
So
though?
143 against 400, okay, 4 against just 4. So it shows that actually this is, you know, there is an understanding in Ukraine, in the world, that this is not only the war in Ukraine, it has global consequences, and we can talk about it.
I do, yes, I do want to talk about the global consequences. It does seem like a good segue into, but I do want to ask you, is there a peaceful way out? Is there a diplomatic resolution that may still be on the table a year into, since the full-scale invasion?
We would hope for that. But the problem is, look, aggressor attacked your country, seized part of your country, and is saying, okay, now we can negotiate, but on the condition that the occupied territory is ours. Would you sit and negotiate? What would be the choice? You know? So it's very difficult. Just imagine, you know, that your country is attacked. Part of your territory is occupied. And then aggressor said, okay, now let's make peace. Would you consider this a just peace? No, this is Russia's position. That's the problem. Ukrainian position is very simple. We are not interested, you know, in war with Russia. We are not interested to see our army in Russia. There are no Ukrainian soldiers in Russia. We are not bombarding Russian cities. We are not bombarding. So for us, the aim of the war is just to liberate Ukraine so that Russian soldiers would leave Ukraine. Full stop. That's the only thing we want. Okay? And Putin saying vice versa. No. What I occupied is mine. So this is the law of jungles. So Ukrainians are fighting, and they will continue to fight. What is interesting is that 92% of Ukrainians are very optimistic in these tragic days, and they believe in victory. And this figure is stable for the whole year. So Ukrainians are ready to fight, but we need support, and this support may come in different way. So we will fight anyway.
What do you know about how Russians feel about it? Is the support for Putin's invasion 1 year down the road still as strong? I'm wondering, because when President Zelensky gave the address to Russia initially, he said Ukraine in your news and Ukraine in reality are two different countries. So how do Russians feel about this conflict 1 year on?
First of all, look, Russians are brainwashed for decades. Ukrainians are depicted as enemies, as not human beings, and that's why a lot of Russians, they believe to what Putin is saying, unfortunately. We Ukrainians, we have a lot of relatives in Russia, okay? I have cousin in Russia. So after a week of bombardment of Kyiv, I called him. He didn't call me since the start of the war. I was waiting for his call, but he didn't call me. So I called him and asked him, Sasha, are you okay? He said, yes. Okay, do you know that we are bombarded? And he said, who is bombarding you? He didn't believe me that Russians are bombarding us. So he decided to call my mother. And my mother said the same. Yes, because there is bombardment, explosions in different part of Kiev. You see how they are brainwashed. So, look, those Russians who disagree with this policy, some of them emigrated. Especially, like scholars, for example, okay? They may find a place in the West or in other places, so they emigrated. When Putin basically declared kind of partial mobilization, a lot of Russians emigrated to whatever possible, to Kazakhstan, to Georgia, because they didn't want to support the war. But a lot of Russians still believe Putin, and that's the problem. But look, what I would say here, we are different societies. We, Ukraine, is democracy. Democracy is not perfect, but we are democracy. It's for us to choose whom we would like to see as our president. I was critical of my president before the full-scale invasion. But now, you know, both authorities, opposition, experts, civil society, we are united because we face this threat. Still, even now, even under martial law, we have possibility for debate. We can debate, for example, if we do not agree with some governmental policy. I'm not talking about the war, because here we all agree.
United.
But for example, you find
governance.
Governance, transparency. We are free to debate. We continue this debate. We democracy. Russia is not. Russia is dictatorship. So basically, this war, it's not only about territorial integrity. It's about freedom, and it's about values.
Yeah, on that note, can I ask you, when you see the international coverage on the conflict in Ukraine, and particularly for people in Malaysia, in the global south, we're so far removed geographically from the conflict. What do you think is missing from not just the news coverage, the media coverage of it, but the global response to the conflict in Ukraine?
I think that if you're talking about the global south, and I visited several countries in Africa, in also Indonesia and Malaysia. So again, all these countries supported Ukraine in the United Nations. So diplomatic support, you know, we are very thankful for that. But this is not enough to stop aggressor. You know, you cannot have dialogue with crocodile. Okay, you can have agreement with crocodile. Crocodile, please don't eat me, and you know what will happen next. So, unfortunately, Mr. Putin, he understands only the logic of force. He wanted to seize Kiev. He was pushed back by Ukrainians. He wanted to seize Ukraine. Ukrainians started counter-offensive. But now Russia is going to start the new offensive. So we need support, and this support can be military, can be economic sanctions. For example, Singapore joined economic sanctions. We receive, it's interesting, we receive military support not only from the West. We receive, for example, Morocco decided to resupply Ukraine with Soviet-type tanks. Okay, thank you very much, Morocco. Okay, we need humanitarian support, raise the voice in favor of Muslims in Ukraine. But what is also, from pragmatic point of view, look, Ukraine is one of the main suppliers of grain to the world market, okay? So Ukraine is #1 exporter of sunflower oil and many other agricultural products. So Ukraine always was considered as basket of Europe, okay? And we are exporting, even now, we are exporting trying to export our grain to those countries which are in need. But how can we do that if our seaports are blocked or bombarded? So it's very difficult. Luckily, you know, with the mediation of the United Nations and with the mediation of the Turkish president, there was so-called grain deal. So this is very important to secure that there are these grain deals. The grain corridors. But again, the war actually undermines the whole world economic chain of supply. Prices for energy, prices for fertilizers, prices for food increased, okay? And this is a result of one man, Mr. Putin, who would like to restore the Russian Empire. One more thing which we should care is non-proliferation. I think it's a very bad example, very bad precedent, when country is giving up nuclear weapon and next day it is attacked by the nuclear power, right? But at this point, Russian army occupied the nuclear power station, which is the third largest in, no, number one largest in Europe, in Zaporizhzhia. And we passed through Chernobyl, you know this name. Yeah? This is on Ukrainian territory. We had to evacuate our children, so we know what was that, Chernobyl. Now they occupy the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it creates very dangerous situation, because if anything happens, it would mean, you know, contamination of the whole region and global contamination. So we should all think about that.
Professor Haran, thank you for speaking with me and sharing some of your personal experiences as well as your insights into this conflict.
But let me finish at optimistic note, and the note of optimism. So if people are fighting for their freedom, nobody can stop them. And we know it from the history of many, many countries, including Malaysia. Today I visited your National Museum. Yesterday I saw Tugu Negara, okay, the monument, your monument. I was very impressed by that. So I believe you can easily understand it. We are fighting for independence, for freedom, and for human dignity. So thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak-banyak.
Thank you for your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.